I think what I find so fun and fascinating about frugal living is there's so much to learn. There's so many new things to try. There's so many opportunities to save wherever you want to save. And in this video, I'm going to share with you something that I ventured out on a limb to do, and it worked. So I hope you'll stick around. If you follow my channel, you know that I have a heavy Czechoslovakian background. I also have a Bohemian background. I have a German background, and my parents lived very frugally. They were raised in the Depression era. My grandparents were raised in the Dust Bowl era. So there are some family traditional foods that I grew up with that were very frugal, but we loved them. And one of the best ways that you can save money and cook frugally and have bellies full is homemade noodles. Now, this scares some people, and it used to scare me as well. I was bound determined to learn how to make these. And when I was in my 20s, I tried to make them, and every single noodle dissolved in the boiling water. It was so sad. I spent so much time making the noodles and then they all dissolved. But I learned quickly what my mistake was and I fixed it after asking my aunt. She told me I just didn't let them dry long enough. So I have made homemade noodles now for 30 some years, and my family has come to expect them at the holidays. I grew up with them. They were always served on the holidays and not really served the rest of the year, which I find very, very strange because they are a super cheap thing to make and everybody loves them. And my dad came to expect it at holidays as well. And he always would make sure I was making the noodles before he agreed to come. They make a lot of food stretch. Noodles are something that when you make them, they absorb all the liquid that you've put in with them. And overnight, the next day, you just have noodles and no liquid. So you can just add water and usually they're fine. I don't even add like more chicken bouillon or anything to them because they're already filled with flavor from absorbing that liquid. And sometimes on the second or the third day, you may have as many as you started with because they keep expanding. And that's why they're such a great thing to make and to use to save money. They really don't take a lot of time. They really don't even take a huge amount of skill. There's just a technique where you make them, you cut them, you make sure they're really, really dry before you cook them, and then you put them in boiling chicken broth or turkey broth or whatever you want to do. And we have turkey coming up on Thursday, so it's a great way to use up some of that turkey by making turkey and noodles. My husband hasn't been able to have noodles now for probably more than 4 years because he became gluten-free, and gluten makes him terribly, terribly sick. And I was bound determined to give him back some of what he lost. So I decided to try my hand at making some gluten-free homemade noodles and surprise him. And they turned out great. So I'm going to share with you how I did it because it was so super easy. So if you're gluten-free, stick around and I'm going to show you. But if you're not gluten-free, I will link the video to my homemade noodles at the end. Homemade noodles only has a few basic ingredients, and that's another reason why they are so affordable to make. Flour, salt, eggs, a little bit of water. That's all you need. But for gluten-free egg noodles, all you need are eggs, xanthan gum, a gluten-free flour like Bob's 1-to-1, and maybe just a little bit of vegetable oil to get it to the consistency you need to hold together and to roll out. Now, I have arthritis in my hands, so using a rolling pin is difficult. And I was a little skeptical to make these because I had a difficult time the last time that I made noodles. But my problem, I think, was as I was making a quadruple batch for the holidays, and I decided to just make a single batch for my husband and I. And it worked much better that way. So I was able to use 1 teaspoon of xanthan gum. My mother-in-law had some left over and she gave it to me when I mentioned it to her. It expired in 2019, and I didn't want to tell her it was 6 years old, and I didn't know if it would affect me trying to make these, but it didn't. They came out perfectly fine. 1 3/4 cups of flour and 3 eggs, and then just enough olive oil, maybe a teaspoon or a tablespoonful till you get it pliable to the way that you want it so that you can roll it out really gently. And don't move the dough around a lot because it is a more easy to break type of dough. And then I used tapioca starch to just put in between the layers when I cut them into noodles. And they came out looking like purchased Reams noodles. They looked even better than my regular flour kind. I was so happy when I put them in the boiling chicken broth and they didn't fall apart. They held together. I was careful about stirring them for the first few minutes just to make sure that they held together. I also have a daughter that is now gluten-free, a son that is now gluten-free. So I'm excited to surprise them at Christmas that I can make homemade gluten-free noodles and they don't have to skip those this year. Now, in my family, we serve these over mashed potatoes, and they say that that is kind of a Midwestern tradition, a starch on a starch, and some people wouldn't even hear of serving a starch on a starch. In fact, one of my best friends who only grew up maybe about 30 miles from me had never heard of noodles on potatoes. She grew up with gravy, and I honestly can't even remember having gravy growing up at any of the holidays. But the noodles came out perfectly. My husband was super surprised and excited. And when he tried them, he was just over the moon that he had homemade noodles once again. Now, we never served chicken in the noodles. We just served the noodles without the chicken. But once in a while, I change it up and I put some chicken in it. And I made a really large chicken breast the other day, and I saved back about a quarter of a sandwich bag and chopped that up in little tiny pieces to put it in my homemade chicken broth that was made from only 2 chicken breast bones. So you can really stretch this out and make it into a meal that will cost you pennies on the dollar. So I promised you I will link that video at the end, but I also wanted to share that it is in my first cookbook, 50 Frugal Recipes When Cooking on a Budget, the regular homemade noodles. And this is the one my family has used for generations. And the interesting part is the German side is on my mother's side, and she also has some Quaker background as well. They made homemade noodles. My dad's side had the Czechoslovakian and the Bohemian background, and they also made homemade noodles. This is something that was done throughout the ages to save money and to use items that they had right there on the farm, like eggs, and to make those things stretch. Even today, the Amish will make noodles and they will use up their farm eggs and make huge batches of them and dry them and store them. Now, I have never tried to store noodles. I have only made them the amount we are going to cook that day and then made them and cooked them. But the Amish actually make them and store them once they get so dry that they can snap them. And that's what you see sometimes in some of the Amish stores is their homemade noodles that are dried where they look like regular pasta. So they cut theirs a lot thinner. So depending on how thick you cut your noodles will depend on how hearty those noodles are. I prefer mine to be thicker, like the Reams noodles that you purchase in the store. For me, that designates they're homemade versus the kind that you buy in the store that are just thin, like regular pasta. So that's how we prefer to eat them. The Czechoslovakians also were really big on dumplings, all kinds of dumplings, potato dumplings, flour dumplings, and they put them in all kinds of soups and stews, not just the normal things that we think about like chicken and dumplings. So that is another way that they stretched that same type of recipe with a few variations to fill tummies, and those dumplings again will expand. And you add liquid the next day, and they keep expanding so that you have more food than you had after you've eaten the first batch. In this video, I have shared some of my family history with you. I am curious, what is a family traditional food that you guys look forward to, that you feel is super frugal and maybe doesn't get the credit it deserves? I would love to hear about it in the comments below. Thanks for listening today, and I hope you will join me for another video.